The missing person posters started appearing before anyone went missing. At first, we thought it was some kind of mistake, even a childish prank. But then we started recognizing the faces. Sarah from the coffee shop. Oliver, who walks his dogs every morning. People who are still very much alive. Still going about their daily routines. Completely unaware, their faces were plastered on telephone poles and trees, with the word missing on them. The dates on the posters were always exactly 7 days in the future. And 7 days later, without fail, they would vanish. No trace, no explanation, just empty spaces where people used to be. This is just one type of story that you might hear by Michael Alexander on Strange Tales and Unusual Circumstances, where the impossible becomes inevitable and the ordinary becomes terrifying. Some stories are too strange to ignore. This first strange tale I present is titled Blizzard of 77, a chilling blend of historical tragedy with supernatural terror. It's an unusual circumstance marked by isolation, possession, and ancient evil. Listening discretion is advised.
The Blizzard of 77 by Michael Alexander. The night before the storm, in an abandoned warehouse, the gatherer moved through his shelter, listening to a small radio on the windowsill, its light blinking in rhythm with the storm. The National Weather Board, along with Environment Canada, are reporting that wind gusts will reach up to 150 kilometers per hour. Officials advise all citizens to remain indoors and to seek shelter immediately. The calm voice reported. The gatherer was a Native American man in his 40s, with long black hair tied in a ponytail. Beneath one eye, a birthmark shaped as a dove marked him. The Great Spirit had called him to find those marked by destiny. He spoke little, but his presence carried weight. As the wind howled, the gatherer poured salt along the edges of the floor and danced in tight circles, his voice rising into a piercing chant. Charms of bone and feather trinkets swayed from the rafters, echoing the rhythm of his ritual. That same night, hundreds of candles flickered in the hidden chamber beneath the Post and Pony Inn. The stone walls were ancient and decayed, threaded with roots and vines that crept through their cracks. In the chamber, a hammer drove its last spike through Douglas Harbaugh's hand. He was 17 years old. Naked, he was pinned by the iron nails to a wooden cross. His mouth was gagged by a cylinder wedged between his teeth. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but no scream could escape. Heavy footsteps circled him, then stopped at his midsection. There was a quick slice, and the teen's body convulsed violently, teeth splintering beneath the pressure of the gag as he began to bleed out. In the corner stood a life-sized bronze statue of Gor-Mock, arms outstretched. Smoke puffed rhythmically from its nostrils, with each breath sounding like a bull. In its abdomen, an orange glow pulsed like a living heart from a fire. Legend held that Gor-Mock was the eater of the innocent and the granter of reincarnation. A deity of ancient terror, he was said to possess the head of a ram, the body of a snake, the legs and hooves of a goat, and wings of a bat unfurled behind his back. Its human features were eerily neutral, neither male nor female. The inn's elderly owner stepped into the candlelight. Cloaked in black, she moved with calm, patient grace. Though she led the cult, her face was gentle, grandmotherly, and kind. She knelt beside the slain teen and brushed his hair tenderly with blood-soaked hands. "There's nothing to be frightened of anymore," she whispered, her voice soft as a lullaby. "There's no pain in the afterlife, not with Gor-Mock." Carrying the piece of the teen, she approached the statue and opened the iron door in its belly. The flames licked outward as she dropped the offering inside. The statue seemed to inhale. Its breath grew louder, before the fire burned hotter. Douglas's lifeless body was then hung upside down. She turned to her followers. "It has been a century since anyone has had the opportunity to summon Gor-Mock," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "This time, we won't fail. This storm that is coming won't stop us from achieving what my great-great-grandmother wasn't able to complete. Go now. Return to your families and hold them close. Soon, hell itself will walk the earth." The next morning, the storm hadn't yet to arrive. Snow drifted lazily across the town. Attila O'Connor, bundled in his snowmobile suit, drove slowly through the streets. The city bustled with winter routines, shovels scraped against pavement, and children's laughter rang out as they carved snow forts into the deep drifts that had quietly accumulated over the season. They were all unaware of what the sky was about to bring. Attila stopped in front of O'Connor's pharmacy. He removed his helmet and ran a hand through his permed hair before heading inside. He was in his early 30s, with a lean build and a quiet, confident presence. His father, Richard, or Dick as his wife called him, stood at a corkboard near the counter, pinning up a poster of a missing boy. This was a portrait of Douglas Harborough, the same teen who was sacrificed. Richard was from Ireland and was in his late 60s. He could be charming at times, though infamous for his drinking and foul mouth. The dented scar on his bald head was a reminder of an old war injury. "Hi, Attila," a flirtatious voice came from the counter. The young store clerk, who was not particularly attractive but friendly, waved shyly. Attila smiled back, and she blushed. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked as he approached. "A kid from a couple of blocks over never came home from school yesterday. The father came in this morning, asking if I could put this up," he stated in a thick accent. Attila frowned. "I don't know if I could handle that, losing your child. Hopefully they find him before this storm rolls in. They're calling it the storm of the century. Like we need any more snow. We already got enough," Richard muttered, moving back behind the cash register. The bell above the door jingled. A gust of cold air swept in, followed by the click of heels and the soft thud of boots. In stepped the owners of the hotel. The woman was dressed in a pristine wool coat, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath a velvet hat. Her husband, tall and silent, followed close behind, his eyes scanning the store with a predator's calm. They paused by the missing poster. The woman tilted her head, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. Her husband's hand, resting at his side, bore a smear of dried blood. "Oh dear," she said sweetly. "Did you cut yourself on something again? You have to be more careful." She gazed at him with annoyance, but though her voice was gentle. She retrieved a serviette from her pocket, licked it, and patted his hand, removing the dried blood from it. They drifted silently behind Attila as he reached for the white paper bag Richard held out. "Prenatal vitamins. Your mother's called 5 times already to remind me to give these to you." "What do I owe you?" Attila asked, reaching into his pocket. "Don't worry about it. By the way," Richard smirked, "that lass at the counter's got a crush on you. She's rough around the edges, but sweet as pie." Attila laughed. "She's like 18, Dad." 23, actually, Richard corrected, still grinning. "Just saying, son. One day the wife will stop making babies, start making complaints, and you'll wake up to find your bits don't work, and your balls are hanging down by your knees." Attila burst out laughing, shaking his head. "You're disgusting! Don't forget about this afternoon. Your mother and I have a surprise for you and Shelley." "What is it?" "You'll see. If I tell you, your mother will have my dick for decoration." Attila turned, chuckling, and then froze. The elderly couple stood directly behind him, too close. The woman's smile didn't falter. "I'm sorry for my dad's remarks," he said, uneasy. The woman leaned in slightly, her perfume floral and cloying. "It's okay, dear," she said with a wink. "There are a lot of worse things out there than a dirty mouth." Later on that day, and right before the storm hit, The O'Connor family stood inside a small 3-bedroom house. Peggy O'Connor wore a neat church dress and smiled as she gave them the keys. She was plump with soft gray hair and a kind laugh. She was also known for keeping Richard in line. She was always quick to scold him for cussing or being rude, with a sharp look and a firm word that somehow still felt loving. Shelley looked cheerful and healthy. Her cheeks were pink, and she had a big smile. She wore a comfy outfit that showed her baby bump. She was having twins. Shelley was pretty, friendly, and full of joy. She always made people feel welcome. "You didn't have to do this," Shelley stated as she hugged her in-laws tight. "Thank you." "You're going to need the space," Peggy replied in her thick Irish accent. "The offer was too good to pass up. Come, love, let's get you home before this storm comes." Later, they drove through the countryside, the snow deep and endless. Richard turned on the radio. According to climatologists, this abnormal weather pattern results from a low-pressure system moving in from the east and a high-pressure system approaching from the west. Their collision can generate wind gusts reaching 150 kilometers per hour. It's currently -20 outside, and we're expected to see -40 by tomorrow morning. 5 minutes outside can result in frostbite. On top of the 125 centimeters of snow we've already received since December 25th, we are about to see around that same number again fall, but over the next 2 to 3 days. Richard shut off the radio with a grunt. "Bullocks? Like we don't have enough of this white shite already." "Dick," Peggy scolded, "don't take the Lord's name in vain." Shelley ignored them and gazed out the window. She was used to the family always squabbling. In the distance, atop a snowy hill surrounded by forest, stood the Post and Pony Inn. It was once a saloon in the Old West, but now it was a hotel. It was a tourist attraction during the warmer months, and was famed for its ghost stories and encounters. A sudden gust of wind slammed into the car. Snow roared across the windshield, blinding them, and the tires lost their grip on the ice. The vehicle spun violently, then slid to a stop in the middle of the road. Richard gripped the wheel. "Is everyone okay? I don't know which way we're facing," he muttered, leaning so close to the glass that his breath fogged it over. "I can't see a bloody thing." He began to drive again. The car rocked under the force of the storm. Peggy's voice quavered from the back seat. "Dick, you can't see anything. Just pull over until it passes." "Rubbish," he snapped. "I can see enough." "Dad," Attila shouted from the passenger seat. "You don't even know what way you're going. You can't see anything. Just pull over." "I'm driving slow," Richard argued. "There's no cause for alarm." His nose was almost pressed to the windshield. Shelley said nothing. She had learned that bickering was just as natural in this family as breathing. Instead, she stared into the storm, the world reducing to a blind white blur. Peggy raised her voice. "Drop your pride and pull over. There's a pregnant woman in the car, Dick. It's not safe." Attila threw up his hands. "You can't be serious. Your nose is practically touching the glass." "I'm fine," Richard shouted. "Bloody hell. Before he could finish his sentence, another violent gust slammed into the car again. The vehicle slid sideways, tires skidding across the ice before jerking to a stop. For a long second, no one spoke. Then Richard sighed. "I think we'll wait for the weather to break." Outside, the blizzard howled. Snow piled fast, drifting around the car until it was half buried. Inside, a heavy drowsiness began to settle over them. Peggy blinked slowly, her voice faint. "I don't feel well," she said before coughing. "Me either," Shelley replied. "I can hardly keep my eyes open." Richard sniffed the air. "Bloody hell, carbon monoxide. The snow's trapping the gas inside. We can't stay in here." He shoved at the door. It resisted, packed tight with snow, but finally it gave way. Peggy's teeth chattered. "Where are we going to go? I haven't seen a house for miles, and I can't see anything." That haunted hotel wasn't too far back, Shelley replied. It's our best bet. Attila agreed. Peggy tried to smile. I've always wanted to go there and see a spirit for myself, but I never got around to it. Bunch of rubbish, if you ask me, Richard muttered. Those ghost stories are for tourists. Shelley managed a weary grin. Creepy or not, we'll be sheltered. By the time they reached it, it was nightfall. The old inn loomed out of the storm like something conjured from the past. Its walls are solid, its windows glowing faintly through the snow. It stood in remarkable condition, proud and pristine despite the century behind it. 2 tall windows flanked a thick wooden door, chained and padlocked shut. The posts where travelers once tied their horses still stood, with the original water troughs underneath. Richard rattled the heavy chain. Bloody hell, it's locked! Peggy, her cheeks flushed from the cold, looked up at the building with childlike wonder. It's beautiful. You wouldn't think a place like this has spirits. They pressed close to one of the windows. A fire burned inside the lobby fireplace, casting a warm orange glow. I can see a fire, Attila said. There have to be people in there. He knocked hard against the glass. Hello? Anyone there? Richard tugged again on the door. The bloody thing's locked from the outside. Who does that? Lock themselves in? Maybe Casper the friendly ghost didn't want company. He let out a mockingly spooky laugh. Dick, Peggy said sharply. That's enough. What time is it? Shelley asked, hugging her belly. Attila glanced at his watch. 6 o'clock. We'll freeze before we find anywhere else. Dad, move. Let me try that lock again. Richard scowled. I'm about to break the damn window. Attila then pulled at the chain, and the padlock clicked open as if it had never been fastened. Well, I'll be damned, he said. It was unlocked the whole time. He removed the chain and pushed the door open, and the family hurried inside. The sound of snow being stomped from their boots filled the vast space, but Richard didn't bother to wipe his feet. Dick, Peggy scolded, clean yourself off. You'll get everything wet. He ignored her. What the? Attila froze. The fireplace had no evidence of a fire. There was a fire burning, he said. You saw it, right? Shelley frowned. Maybe it was a hallucination from the carbon monoxide? When we get home, the doctor's checking all of us, especially the babies, Peggy demanded. The lobby was grand but aged. The craftsmanship was elegant but tarnished by time. A radio sat on the fireplace mantel beside wood logs and a box of matches. Iron rings were fastened into the floor and stone walls on either side of the fireplace. Odd, unsettling details no one remarked on. Couches sat near a table. At the far end were closed doors leading to other corridors. Close by, an old grandfather clock ticked steadily beside a winding staircase that disappeared into the shadows of a lower level. Behind the front desk hung a painted portrait of Mary Martin, who was 20 at the time, dressed in the opulent fashion of a woman accustomed to admiration and privilege. Her gown, a deep sapphire silk, swept gracefully off her shoulders, revealing the smooth line of her collarbones and the gentle curve of her neck. A gold locket rested just above the swell of her chest, catching the light with quiet elegance. Her black hair was braided and drawn over one shoulder, thick and glossy, a striking contrast to her vivid green eyes. Her face was delicate, pretty, in a way that seemed almost too fragile for the world. Her innocent eyes seemed to follow them, soft and unassuming, eyes that betrayed nothing of the darkness she once commanded. Few would suspect that this gentle-looking young woman had been the hotel's original owner, or that she had led a secretive circle in the occult. Beneath that porcelain exterior had lived a practitioner of black magic, a quiet leader whose rituals had once drawn whispers through the walls. The portrait remained, untouched by time, as if guarding the room with a gaze that knew far more than it revealed. "Let's get you warm," Attila said, guiding Shelley to the couch. Behind him, Richard began to wander off. "Where are you going?" Peggy called. "That looks like a pub over there," he said, smirking. Got to warm myself up, too. Deep below, in the hidden sacrificial chamber, the statue of Gor-Mock began to breathe heavily. The flames within its belly roared to life. Glowing through cracks in its metal shell, it knew it had visitors. Shelley's gaze drifted to the old radio on the mantel. She waddled closer and turned the dial. A crackling broadcast came through, the announcer's voice breaking with static. "We have with us on CB radio Blake Bateman, an eyewitness to the storm hitting landfall. Blake, are you there?" The radio host asked, but there was no response. "Blake, can you hear me?" It's silent for another moment. Then Blake's voice came through. "I'm here." He gives an awkward chuckle. "Can you tell us what you witnessed?" "Let me tell you. It was quite a sight. I live just off Lake Erie, and just before noon, the sun disappeared. Looking out onto the lake, a blanket of black came quickly. The snow looked like a sandstorm, and in a matter of minutes, there was a loud crashing sound. My windows had smashed from the weight of the snow and the wind hitting the house. Quickly the power went out, and from there, complete whiteouts for the past 6 hours. Now, snowdrifts are enabling us to even exit the house." The man replied before the radio cut back to static. "It's getting worse out there," Attila said, as he turned off the radio and took a seat beside his wife. Miles away, Father Nigel Mutombo sat in his candlelit rectory, his Bible open in front of him. The priest was a thin, bald man with dark skin. On his forearm, a pale birthmark stood out. It was shaped like a dove with wings spread wide. Suddenly, every candle in the rectory extinguished in unison, plunging the room into darkness. The church's main entrance doors burst open with a thunderous crack. Father Mutombo staggered, clutching his forearm. His birthmark had vanished. A vision seared into his mind. Gor-Mock's statue, its belly ablaze, exhaling fire with a roar that would shake the heavens. Elsewhere, others bearing the same mark were struck by the same vision at the exact moment, as if summoned by a force beyond time. When the vision passed, the priest found himself staring at a floorboard in the corner of his office, as if something beneath it called to him. The church was being used as a refuge. Snow howled through the open doors. Families huddled in pews, praying under the cold drafts. "It's all right, folks," Father Mutombo called. "We'll get through this storm together," he added as he exited his space and made his way through the church. He struggled against the wind to shut the doors, but they burst back open again. A figure stood there. It was Officer Mackenzie, his snowmobile suit caked with frost, and his helmet under one arm. Beside him was a shivering woman. "Nancy Harbo?" Father Mutombo gasped, rushing forward. She collapsed into his arms, her voice barely a whisper. "Father." Officer Mackenzie knelt beside them. "Do you know her? She's the one whose boy went missing." The priest said softly. "She's hypothermic," the officer warned. "Do you have any blankets?" "In the back," Father Mutombo said quickly. "Nancy, where's Fred? Why were you out in this storm alone?" Nancy's lips trembled, but no words came. Hours before her arrival, the storm continued to show no mercy. Wind howled through the farmland, rattling everything in its path. Inside the Harbo home, Nancy stood near the window, clutching her robe tightly around her thin frame. Snow whirled outside, thick and endless, swallowing the world in white. Her husband, Fred Harbo, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, entered. He looked exhausted, his cheeks red and wet from the weather. "There's too much snow," he said, panting as he brushed ice from his beard. "The truck got stuck." Nancy's lip trembled. "He's probably so cold and scared, Fred," she whispered. "Bring him home, please. Find our son." "I'll find him," Fred promised, his voice softening as he reached for her hand. She wanted to believe him. Watching him zip into a snowmobile suit, her stomach turned with dread. He kissed her forehead, then turned and left. Moments later, Nancy heard the growl of the snowmobile engine outside before the sound faded into the storm. She stood there a long moment, trembling. Then, unable to stay behind, she threw on her jacket, hat, and boots, and left the home. Father Mutombo tucked a blanket around Nancy Harbo's shivering body. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide and unfocused. "It's bad out there, Father, and it's going to get worse. She's the only survivor I've found so far." Father Mutombo looked up, his expression grave, as the officer stated. "You can't travel without a sled now. Even then, visibility's gone. Most cars are abandoned. Some, well, looks like they waited for the storm to pass and died from the cold or poisoning. Lines are down, radio's choppy. There's no way to call for help." The priest's voice was calm, but heavy with sadness. "I'll pray for them. In the meantime, if you find others, continue to bring them here. There's a lot of teachers and children stuck in the schools. If we can get to them, this place is going to run out of room quick," the officer stated as he struggled to close the doors against the violent wind as he stepped outside. Attila, Shelley, and Peggy huddled near the fireplace inside the inn. The portrait of Mary Martin and her painted eyes fixed eerily on the expecting mother. In the adjoining bar, Richard sat alone, swirling a glass of whiskey. Behind him, booths lined the walls, the air thick with silence. From the far corner, and from within the darkness, something began to take shape. It was a shadow, darker than the dark itself. The apparition stood motionless, broad-shouldered, cloaked in what looked like an old fisherman's raincoat and hat. Somewhere beyond, a faint metallic sound of chains dragging echoed through the room. He looked towards the source of the noise, which was coming beyond a narrow staircase in the corner, leading upward and into the dining area, which was deeper into shadow. The sound came again, closer this time. Richard downed the last of his whiskey, slammed the glass on the counter, and moved toward it. By the time he got up, the figure behind him had vanished. He pushed through the swinging doors and into the kitchen, but the noise stopped. Only the low hum of the refrigerators filled the silence. Pots and pans hung neatly above the chef's line, glinting dully in the faint light. Curious, Richard opened the freezer. Frosted packages of meat lined the shelves. "Fancy that," he muttered, grinning. "We could stay in here all winter and not starve." As Peggy, Attila, and Shelley continued to sit by the fire, the lights flickered and died. Peggy clutched her son's arm. The room fell silent except for the wind outside. Then the lights blinked back on, dim and unsteady, casting long, trembling shadows. "The generator's losing fuel," Richard said, appearing from the darkness. Peggy gave her husband a look. "Where have you been? You were gone a while." "Just mucking about." Shelley rubbed her belly. "I really don't want to stay the night in a haunted hotel." She raised her concern. "We may not have a choice," Richard replied. Peggy looked uneasy. "Shelley needs to eat. She can't go all night like this." "I'm starving," Shelley said weakly. "If I don't eat soon, the babies are going to start eating me." She gave an awkward chuckle. Peggy searched her coat pocket and found a single mint. She offered it, but Shelley shook her head. Peggy popped it into her own mouth. "Lots of nutritional value in that piece of candy," Richard teased. Peggy glared at him. "What are we going to do, Richard?" "Relax. There's a freezer full of food in the kitchen," he said. "If we're snowed in, we might as well eat." Peggy sighed. "The food isn't ours to take." "Piss on that," Richard snapped. "Right now it is. We could be trapped here for days. You want to starve over our moral standards? Come on, kiddo. Let's go find the generator." "We'll just pay for what we eat, that's all," Peggy called after them. "And I didn't appreciate your sarcasm." Outside, Officer Mackenzie's snowmobile cut weakly through the swirling snow. He stopped beside a buried car, now only a mound of white. He brushed the snow from the driver's window and flashed his flashlight inside. "This is Officer Mackenzie," he shouted. "Is there anyone inside?" He couldn't see anybody. Only grocery bags filled the back seat. He moved on to the next car. Inside, a mother and her infant sat frozen together. He made the sign of the cross and gently closed the door. The next vehicle held a lone man, slumped forward, lifeless from carbon monoxide. The officer placed the body back gently and whispered a small prayer. In the rectory, Father Mutombo wrote a letter to the Canadian Archdiocese by candlelight. I must inform you. The box has been opened. The threat is authentic. We need myrtle. Setting the pen aside, he moved to the corner of the room and pried up several loose floorboards. Beneath them, a small safe waited. He turned the dial and opened it. Inside lay a long, narrow white box trimmed in gold, an ancient cross etched on its lid. It looked older than any church relic he'd ever seen. He carried it to his desk and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, a photograph of the bronze statue labeled Gor-Mock was seen. Underneath were the words, Eater of the Innocent. Then, a hideous scrapbook bound in human flesh, its spine laced with sinew. He crossed himself before touching it. Sliding out from the book was an envelope. Opening it, his fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out a black and white photograph. The edges were frayed, the surface glossy but aged, and the image it held was grotesquely mesmerizing. It was Mary Martin, unmistakably the same woman from the oil painting in the inn's foyer. But this was no portrait of grace or hospitality. In the photo, she hovered several feet above the floor, suspended in midair directly before the hotel's grand fireplace, which looked eerily unchanged from its current state. Her body was bound in thick iron chains, taut and unforgiving, digging into her wrists and ankles with such force that the skin beneath appeared bruised even in monochrome. Her back was arched unnaturally, as if pulled by invisible strings. Her mouth hung wide open in a silent scream, jaw unhinged, and from the shadows above, a spectral serpent tail entered her gaping mouth. Her eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites, and her face was contorted in a mixture of agony and ecstasy. Around her, the pentagram etched into the floor glowed faintly, even in the photograph, as if the energy it once held still lingered. The chains weren't just restraints, they were part of the ritual. Each link seemed etched with symbols, runes too ancient to decipher, and they pulsed with a dark rhythm, as though alive. The flames in the hearth cast long, flickering shadows that danced across her suspended form like mocking spirits. In the background, tucked in the corner, was the statue of Gor-Mock, flames curled up from his belly. He stared at the image, unable to look away. It wasn't just a photograph. It was a moment captured in the middle of something unholy, a possession, a summoning, a sacrifice. And Mary Martin, the beautiful innkeeper, had once been its centerpiece. In blood red were the words, Mary Martin, the chosen servant of Gor-Mock, eater of the innocent, and the granter of reincarnation. He opened the book, where inside he found more photographs. Though these weren't for the faint of heart, these were crime scene photos. Mary hanging from a noose, her infant smothered in a bassinet, her brother Jonathan bound to a chair with his mouth torn open, and her husband slumped from the belly of the statue, charred beyond recognition. He turned a few more pages, passing by the rituals and curses the book held. As he turned, a phrase leaped out in blood. When the ritual's complete, hell will align with earth. Beside the words were rough sketches of rotting corpses, a creature that was half dog and something else, and black shadow figures. Below them were the words, Hell Fiends. He closed the book, and then from the box he drew out a vial of bronze-tinted holy water and a crucifix, its end marked with an inverted cross, a symbol of holy dominance. Finally, he unwrapped a shrouded tome. Embroidered words read, The Prophet's Practice of Holy Exorcisms. He began to familiarize himself with it. Later, Father Mutombo moved through the church carrying a briefcase. The pews were now full. Men, women, and children were huddled together for warmth. He passed silently, offering brief blessings. In the rear corridor, several snowmobilers rested, their suits hanging to dry. The priest moved quietly, lifted a gold and black suit from a hook, took a helmet, and disappeared. Outside, the blizzard had grown monstrous. Cars, buses, and entire buildings were becoming swallowed by the relentless snow. The priest trudged to the snowmobiles. After several failed starts, he found the right one, straddled it, and drove into the storm, his figure vanishing into the white void. Below the inn, Richard and Attila descended a short set of stairs carved from stone and into the utility area, which looked to be a newer addition. The low hum of the generator resting in the corner echoed through the space. Tools hung from hooks along the walls. Old shelves were stacked with dusty cans of oil and maintenance supplies. On the floor were several drums of gas. Then, for a moment, everything went dark. When the lights flickered back on, Attila was now gripping his father's shoulder. "What, son? You afraid of the dark?" Richard teased. He pulled his hand away. "I'm not afraid of the dark," he muttered. "I'm afraid of what might come out of it, though." "Don't tell me you still believe in all that ghost rubbish." Richard scoffed. "You're about to be a father. You have to cut that shit out." In the farthest corner, shrouded in shadow, the faint outline of a sealed stone door blended seamlessly into the wall, its edges lost in the dim light. Attila wondered as he looked at the supplies. Feeling a faint draft brush his skin, he ran a hand along the stone as he listened to his father. "It's not shit, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm not going to stand here and let you mock me." Richard filled the generator while he spoke to his son. "I'm not mocking you, lad. I'm just trying to give you a sense of rational thinking." Attila stood a few feet away from the hidden entrance. He waved his hands through the air. Richard looked to his son. "Now what the hell are you doing? You slowly going mad?" "I feel a draft," he replied. "A draft?" Richard snorted. "Look at this place. It's all mortar and rock. There's no insulation, and it's bloody colder than Jesus's balls out there." He tightened the cap on the generator, and the machine hummed to life, the lights flickering brighter until the entire room glowed. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl. Father Motumbo steered his snowmobile to a stop in front of the glowing inn, its yellow lights fighting against the swirling snow. A massive drift had piled up against the entrance, sealing it off completely. He winced as a pain shot through his forearm. The wind shifted, blowing a gust of snow as if it were a sign to continue to the rear, so he pressed forward, fading into the squall. At the back of the building, the priest stared at a stone wall buried beneath an accumulating snowdrift. The snowbank began to twist into a spiral, and as the vortex cleared a path, it revealed storm cellar doors just below. It felt as though the storm itself were inviting him in. He jumped off the machine and pushed forward, struggling to open the doors before disappearing into the building. Moments later, another snowmobile engine echoed through the night. Connie Fletcher approached, leaning forward against the wind. In her 40s, she was tough and determined. She was a volunteer searcher shaped by a past deeply rooted in the old clergy. The same dove-shaped birthmark was present on her arm, an ancestral mark of those who had once faced the evil that now stirred again. She emerged from the forest and slowed down as she spotted the snowmobile, which was now almost buried under the storm. A sudden pain made her grab her arm. She took a deep breath, dropped her visor, and gunned the engine, speeding off toward the back of the building. Inside the storm cellar, the air was damp and heavy, thick with the scent of earth and mildew. Darkness pressed in from all sides, broken only by a faint, unnatural glow flickering deeper within the tunnel. Father Mutombo stepped cautiously, his boots echoing against the narrow stone passageway. The tunnel branched into small chambers, and what they exposed was consumed by the darkness. As he approached the source of the light, a low, guttural sound rumbled through the stone, breathing deep and bestial, like a bull exhaling in the dark. The glow pulsed brighter, revealing a towering statue of Gor-Mock, its eyes seeming to shimmer with malevolent life. Inside the chamber, the priest froze and dropped to his knees, crossing himself with trembling hands. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes locked onto the crucified figure of the Harbo boy hung upside down on the wall beside the statue, arms splayed, and blood trailing like vines down the stone. The breathing grew louder, closer, wrapping around his mind like a fog. A dizzying haze crept in, dulling his senses. He shook his head violently, forcing clarity back into his thoughts. Without another glance, he turned and fled the chamber, stumbling through the tunnels in search of an exit. Richard and Attila had left the area and decided to take a look around. They walked side by side down the long L-shaped hallway. The colorful carpet beneath their boots looked absurdly cheerful against the cold stone walls they were just in. Wall-mounted lamps flickered weakly, casting uneven pools of light on the room numbers fastened on the doors. Each door they passed was locked. Richard tugged at every handle, grumbling under his breath. "What kind of bloody hotel keeps all the rooms locked?" They passed Suite 5, the gunslinger's room, and Suite 6, the restless maiden's suite. He gave each handle a frustrated rattle. Then, behind them, a soft click echoed through the corridor. The door to the gunslinger's suite had opened on its own. Attila gave his father a look that said everything but the words, "I told you so." Curiosity got the better of them, and they stepped inside. The gunslinger's suite was frozen in time, untouched since the 1800s. A fully stocked bar stood at the far end beside a poker table scattered with dusty chips and faded cards. A bed with matching end tables occupied one corner, and a small couch and table in another. A pamphlet sat unnoticed on the table beside a television that seemed decades out of place. An old stand-up radio leaned against the wall beneath a pendulum clock, and in the corner stood a freestanding bathtub, curtained off, beside a toilet and sink, hidden behind a partition. As Richard explored, Attila's attention shifted to the hallway. He leaned out the door, ears straining. The faint clink of chains echoed from the far end of the corridor, slow, dragging, and deliberate. But when he peered down the hall, nothing was there. "I know where I'm sleeping tonight," Richard called out, inspecting the bar with a grin. "Let's find a room for your mother," he said jokingly. Attila turned just as the door to the restless maiden's suite creaked open across the hall. "That was closed a second ago," he expressed. "It's only the wind," Richard said dismissively. "There's got to be a draft somewhere." The restless maiden's suite was smaller, arranged more like a lived-in apartment from another century. A tiny kitchen sat tucked against the wall, and a pair of side rooms connected off it. After a cautious glance around, Richard closed the door behind them. They continued toward the staircase and came across another windowless corridor. The next corridor was shorter, swallowed in shadows, with 10 more rooms, 5 on each side. At the end of the hall stood Mary Martin's suite, with a sign tacked to the door that read, "No admittance." "This place is bigger than it looks," Richard said. "Come on, let's go find your mother and Shelley. Tell them we've found our sleeping arrangements." Connie had arrived back at the church. She burst through the doors and was greeted by Officer Mackenzie, who sat with a group of snowmobilers sipping coffee. "Connie, is everything okay?" Officer Mackenzie asked. "It's just cold out there. Have you seen Father Mutumbo?" The snowmobilers exchanged glances and began suiting up to look for more survivors. Officer Mackenzie shook his head. "Haven't seen him. He's probably in his office writing a sermon for the survivors." Before he could say anything more, a voice shouted, "My suit and helmet are missing!" Another man came in frantically. "My sled's gone!" Officer Mackenzie approached the snowmobilers, and Connie hurried toward the priest's rectory. Inside, the office was empty. The white box lay open on his desk. She rubbed her arm again, her skin burning under her jacket, and fled the room. Out in the main hall, the snowmobiler was still ranting about his missing sled. "What color's your sled?" Connie asked. "Gold and black," he replied. She pulled the officer aside. "Father Motumbo took it." His brow furrowed. "How do you know that?" "I saw it outside the Post and Pony Inn." "Shit," he muttered. "Let's go." He told the man to stay there, and he would get to the bottom of it. Father Motumbo had now made his way to the lobby. The O'Connors were no longer sitting by the fire. The fireplace roared, its flames rising unnaturally high, hissing and spitting as if aware of his presence. He made the sign of the cross and whispered the Lord's Prayer as he moved forward. Behind the front desk, the portrait of Mary watched him with cold, painted eyes. Another pulse of pain shot through his arm. He rolled up his sleeve, and the mark of the dove had returned as a raw scar. He approached the fire and uncorked the vial of holy water. When he sprinkled it into the flames, they hissed before snapping back to a calm glow. From somewhere deep within the inn, faint laughter echoed, carefree and distant. The O'Connor family remained blissfully unaware of the danger that loomed. He paused at the foot of the staircase, his gaze lingering on the old clock that stood sentinel there, its hands frozen in quiet defiance of time. Then, slowly, he began his descent. Above him, the portrait of Mary seemed to watch, her painted eyes trailing his every step. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped at the intersection between light and darkness. Lifting the vial again, he whispered prayers, sprinkling holy water along the walls. One by one, the lamps flickered to life as he moved deeper into the gloom. He then removed a censer from around his neck and lit it, the incense curling in thin trails of smoke as he continued to recite his prayer as he moved down the hall. At the end of the hall, he found Mary Martin's suite. He hesitated before he turned the handle and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The O'Connor family gathered at a table in the dining lounge, plates piled high with food. Shelley paused mid-bite, frowning. "What's the matter, hun?" Attila asked. "I smell incense," she replied, and smelt the air again. Attila smelt the air and then replied, "I don't smell anything." Peggy smiled knowingly. "When I was pregnant with Attila, the phantom smells I had were ridiculous." Richard chuckled with his mouth full. "She always thought it was me farting, but half the time it was her." The family laughed. Peggy scolded him gently. "Dick, not at the table, and swallow before you speak." Inside the suite, Father Motumbo set his briefcase on the bed and unzipped his snowmobile suit, revealing his cassock beneath. The suite was larger than the others, almost homelike. On a small table sat a framed post-mortem family photograph, sepia-toned and solemn, of Mary's late husband, who had been twice her age, seated stiffly in a high-backed chair, his eyes closed in death, but dressed in his Sunday best. Beside him stood Mary, youthful and composed, cradling their infant child in her arms. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between grief and duty, her gaze fixed just past the camera's lens. The baby, swaddled in lace, looked barely a few weeks old. Wasting no time, he hung his outerwear neatly by the door, straightened his collar, and began unpacking his spiritual tools. As he laid them out, he recited softly, "Archangel Saint Michael, guardian and prince of the heavenly host, defend us in battle. Let your light protect us against the principalities and powers of this world of darkness." He lifted a folded shawl, kissed the white dove embroidered on it, and draped it around his shoulders. Next came the book bound in flesh, the book of exorcisms, followed by a crucifix, vials of holy water, incense, and a candle. The last items he set aside were a roll of tape and a Bible. He crossed himself, opened the Bible, and froze at the sound of a bang on the door. A little girl's laughter echoed down the hall, followed by fading footsteps. Forcing himself to ignore it, he returned to his prayer, tearing pages from the Bible and whispering, "Give us strength to battle against spirits of evil in high places." After he recited, he then taped the page onto the wall before continuing. Back in the dining lounge, the family leaned back in their chairs, full and warm. Richard reached for the wine bottle and filled his glass. "To our safety," he said, raising his drink. "And to the new addition to our family." Shelley winced. Peggy leaned toward her. "You all right, dear?" "The babies are kicking," she said. Attila grinned. "We've got a pair of football players," Richard said proudly. "That's the fighting Irish in her." "That's all we need. 2 more of you," Attila muttered. Peggy and Shelley laughed. Richard tore off a piece of bread and threw it at his son. Attila tossed it back, both of them laughing until Peggy stood up and put an end to it. Peggy clapped her hands once, firm and loud. "Settle down, children. We're guests here, and I don't think I'm cleaning that mess up. It's getting late. The mother-to-be needs her rest." Richard pushed himself up from his chair, looking guilty, but trying to hide it. "Where do you think you're going?" Peggy demanded. "You just said it's time for bed," he replied with mock innocence. "I was going to try that bar in our room. And who's going to clean this mess? You're not carrying babies, are you? You didn't make the meal, did you?" Attila leaned back, sighing. "You guys get some rest. I'll clean up after Shelley gets settled in." "I'm not staying in that room alone," Shelley said quickly. Attila compromised. "I'll do the dishes first thing in the morning, then. I can stay with her." Peggy offered, but Attila denied the offer. "Don't forget to put the fire out. We don't need to be trapped in a fiery inferno." "Good night," Richard said, as he placed his chair back under the table. Before they left, Richard stooped at Shelley's seat and gave her a soft smile. "And good night to you, beautiful." He kissed her on the forehead. Bending down to her belly, he cooed in a babyish tone, "And good night to you two as well." The storm continued to rage through the night. Officer Mackenzie and Connie arrived at the front of the Post and Pony Inn, snowmobiles cutting through the blizzard. Through the blowing snow, the drifts had grown monstrous, piled high and towering over the roof, completely sealing off every entrance and window. There was no way in or out. Connie gestured toward the back of the building, and the two drove off into the storm. At the rear of the building, the drifts were even thicker. "Somewhere here is a storm cellar entrance. We're going to need to dig through this, though," Connie said. Officer Mackenzie rubbed at his frozen beard. "He may not even be in there. Maybe his sled died, and he's stranded somewhere out here. Let's meet in the morning. Hopefully the storm will ease up, and we can get help from the church." "No!" Connie snapped. "We can't put anyone else at risk, and he can't do it alone." He climbed back onto his sled, shaking his head. "Well, I'm not putting us at risk. I'm going to check around here for him. If he's inside, he's safe. I'll see you in the morning." Shelley lay in bed beneath a thick quilt in the restless maiden's suite. Attila sat at the edge, gently stroking her hair. "I've never seen your dad act like that." "Act like what?" "Throwing food, talking in a baby voice. It's kind of cute that he's excited to be a grandpa." He smiled faintly. "He has his moments, or he's just soused." Shelley's eyes fluttered shut as his hand traced through her hair. "You're too hard on him sometimes," she whispered before drifting into sleep, and Attila rose quietly and slipped out of the room. In the gunslinger's suite, Peggy sat in a chair by the lamp, reading the pamphlet she'd found on the table. Richard was at the bar, pouring himself a drink. As he moved past the poker table, he noticed a brass information tag tacked to the surface. "I didn't notice this when we were here earlier," he stated. Peggy looked up from her reading. "What, dear?" "An information plaque," he said, leaning closer. "What's it say?" He squinted and read aloud, "The Gunslinger's Suite. From 1874 to 1877, this room was used for wealthy men to play high-stakes cards in private. In 1876, 2 players argued over a hand. Guns were drawn, and both men met their demise at this table. To this day, their spirits linger. Guests still hear them arguing before gunshots ring out." Peggy's eyes widened. "This is so exciting to be in one of these places." "It's a cash grab if you ask me. Keep an open mind and stop being so skeptical." Richard sat beside her and grinned wickedly. "Boo!" Peggy jumped, then laughed. They say there's a bunch of spirits that haunt this building. Read this." She shoved the pamphlet toward him. Richard sighed, but humored her. "The Watcher, a large black mass that wears a rain cloak, mostly seen in the lounge area. His identity is unknown." He chuckled. "Well, I was there, and I didn't see anyone watching me." Meanwhile, he didn't notice the apparition manifesting behind him during his visit. Peggy gave him a pointed look, which made him straighten slightly. He continued reading. The gunslingers we already know. A 6-year-old girl named Abigail drowned in the bathtub, and she likes to play tricks on the guests. The doppelganger ghost. People have witnessed spirits who take on their appearance. The sound of chains being dragged by an unknown soul is heard throughout the hotel. Locals say it's Mary Martin walking the halls, still looking for her child. Guests in the Restless Maiden's suite have awoken to find their rooms tidied or items organized. He stopped reading and dropped the pamphlet on the table. "I don't need nightmares about death and tragedy." "You're not done yet. There's more, you party pooper." Peggy pouted. Attila slipped out of the Restless Maiden's suite to hear his parents laughing. He made his way down the hall and towards the staircase. He entered the lobby, where Mary's eyes followed him. When he left, her gaze lingered. A few minutes later, he returned with a bucket of water from the kitchen. He whistled softly as he approached the fireplace, the tune almost lost beneath the roar of the blizzard outside. He doused the flames until only embers glowed. He turned around to see Mary's eyes looking at him. He moved to the right, and ever so subtly her eyes followed. He went to the left, and her eyes did the same. As my dad said, it's only a gimmick. Trying to convince himself. He left and returned to the kitchen, whistling along the way. Mary's eyes slowly turned towards the extinguished fire, and the faint rattle of chains filled the air. Smoke began to curl from the logs, and then flames reignited violently before the sound of the chains drifted away again. While Attila was in the kitchen scrubbing dishes, a chill crept up his spine. The sense of being watched pressed heavily around him. He stopped, glanced over his shoulder, and froze at the faint, dragging sound of chains coming from the back of the area. "Dad, that you? Mom? Shelley?" he called, but no one answered. Back at the suite, Shelley slept soundly. The room was dark, yet something darker moved. A shadow thickening into the shape of a woman's hand, translucent and graceful, and perfectly manicured. The hand traced the edge of the sheet, sliding down toward her feet before fading from sight. The blanket began to lift, inch by inch. Impressions formed on her skin as unseen fingers stroked her feet. Shelley murmured dreamily. "That feels amazing right now." She sighed, sinking back into sleep. Continued to be drawn by the noise, Attila stepped into the bar, where shadows twisted across glass and brass, warping his silhouette like a specter in motion. In the corner, something shifted. It was the Watcher, the dark figure cloaked in shadow, barely visible as it quietly observed. The chains echoed again, faint yet unmistakable. He followed the sound out of the bar and into the lobby. The noise brought him the top of the stairs of the utility room. The lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows. A figure darted across his vision from left to right. "Jesus!" he hissed, stumbling back. "Screw this!" He turned and fled the space in a hurry. By dawn, the storm had buried the Post and Pony Inn completely. The drifts towered above the roof, swallowing the entire building in white silence. Father Motumbo stood before the walls that were now fully covered with Bible pages. He then pulled the vial of holy water from his pocket, sprinkling it in wide arcs as he recited the Lord's Prayer. Each drop sizzled and hissed upon contact. When he finished, a sound of a soft flutter drew his attention. A cluster of pages had fallen, forming a perfect upside-down cross on the wall. He lit a candle and began the invocation. "Father in heaven, please rebuke these spirits and their effects, and cast them away from this community and this stranded family." The words barely left his lips before the paper edges blackened and curled. The wall pulsed. The cross turned darker and darker until the center tore open. From within, arms burst forth. They were limbs with claws that multiplied and branched out as they reached. They seized him, shredding his robe and flesh as he screamed. He fought, kicked, and clawed back, but the arms dragged him up the wall, crucifying him upside down before pulling him through the rift. The portal snapped shut, and all the Bible pages fell to the floor at once. In the gunslinger's suite, Richard lay asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked neatly over him, but Peggy was nowhere to be seen. The peace was shattered as the radio exploded with a blast of white noise, and Richard jolted awake. Through the static came voices, men arguing over a poker hand. "Check!" one barked. "Raise!" another growled. The radio crackled violently. Then came shouting, followed by 2 gunshots that echoed like thunder. Then the noise cut out, leaving only silence. "Bloody hell, Peggy, what time is it?" Richard shouted, his voice thick with irritation. "Fucking gimmicks, rattling me to death." Across the hall, Attila tore through the room, frantic. "You haven't seen it. I put it right there last night." "What?" Shelley asked, lifting her shirt slightly. Scratches, deep and resembling claw marks, covered her stomach. "Attila, look at this." He barely glanced. "Probably just the blanket scratching you. That's my grandfather's watch. I never misplace it." A knock on the door interrupted them. Shelley opened it. Richard stood in the hall. "Top of the morning. Mom with you?" "No," she said. "Come in." Richard entered and looked at the clock. The hands stood still. "Your clock is dead, too?" "She's probably cooking breakfast, Dad," Attila replied, half annoyed while he was half buried under the couch. "What in God's name are you doing?" he asked, watching Attila still digging under the couch. "Dropped something," Attila muttered. "Let's go see if we can find her," Shelley said. "You coming?" "Give me a minute," Attila replied, still searching. Richard and Shelley stepped into the dim lobby. The fire was down to embers, the storm still pounding outside, and the windows were white with snow. "Bloody hell," Richard muttered. "This storm's made day black as night." He stared into the fireplace. "I told him to put that out last night." "Peggy!" Her voice echoed faintly from the dining room. "Up here. You hungry?" Attila had made it to the lobby, clutching his recovered watch. "I thought I told you to put the fire out," Richard said. Attila glanced at the flames, bewildered. "I dumped a bucket of water on it last night before I did the dishes. I swear it was out." "Clearly it wasn't. And I know what you're about to say next. It wasn't ghosts." Together they headed toward the dining lounge. Peggy beamed as they entered. She was pouring glasses of orange juice around the table. "Found cartons of juice in the fridge. I was wondering when everyone was going to wake up. You must have been exhausted. We would have been here sooner, but Attila misplaced his watch," Shelley expressed. Peggy raised her brows knowingly. "That was the Restless Maiden." Attila frowned. "The what?" "I read some information on the inn," Peggy said proudly. Richard groaned. "She read a pamphlet." Peggy shot her husband a sharp look. "Don't be condescending." Shelley leaned in, all charm and confidence. "That was an amazing foot rub last night. Thank you so much." She kissed Attila on the cheek. He blinked, smirking. "I didn't, but I'll take the credit. And that kiss." Peggy chuckled softly. "The Restless Maiden, like I said." "Who is this person, Mom?" Attila asked, shaking his head. "You starting to get cabin fever?" Laughter rippled around the table, breaking through the winter gloom. Outside, the storm hadn't relented. Engines whined in the distance, faint through the thick white curtain. Officer Mackenzie and Connie rode their snowmobiles through the blizzard, the world around them a blur of frost and swirling gray. They dismounted at the rear of the Post and Pony Inn, pulling small shovels from the compartments in their sleds. The snowdrift before them had grown enormous overnight. It was dense, heavy, and unyielding. Officer Mackenzie exhaled, watching his breath vanish. "What have you gotten yourself into, Nigel?" He was safe where he was. Why would he come here? He looked to Connie. People are dying in this weather. They came to him for comfort, for shelter, and he leaves to come here. Hopefully, he's not stuck out in this mess. I searched for hours last night, but I couldn't find him. Connie tightened her scarf and nodded toward the wall. He's doing what needs to be done. Let's get to it. We could already be too late. Officer Mackenzie jabbed his shovel into the drift. We're the ones who should be worried, he said. If he's in there, he's got heat, food, and shelter. How much do you actually know about this place, officer? Connie asked as she began to dig. Officer Mackenzie shrugged. I know tourists come here hoping to see ghosts. Some old murders happened, and a child drowned. The owners seem decent enough. They're old and mind their business. There aren't too many incidents reported, just people getting spooked. Connie paused, her shovel halfway through a stroke. This building, this land, it's unholy, she said quietly. She stopped digging and sighed, her voice carrying over the wind. What I care to explain out here in this storm, and especially to someone outside the clergy, is that hundreds of years ago, the Puritans came from England to build their perfect colony. But among them was a wealthy family, the Joneses. They hid their true purpose. They worshipped something dark. When they fled to Canada, they changed their name to Martin and settled here. They built this place and continued their worship in secret to a deity named Gor-Mock. Half ram, half serpent. Neither male nor female, but something in between. They practiced dark magic, spreading their influence, changing their names so no one could trace them. She froze, her eyes scanning the white void around them. What is it? Officer Mackenzie asked. I heard something, Connie replied, before resuming her work. Anyway, Gor-Mock was known as the Eater of the Innocent, the granter of reincarnation. Even the Vatican doesn't know its origin. Mackenzie frowned, distracted, glancing into the storm. Am I boring you? Connie asked. I thought I heard something too. They both fell silent. Only the howl of the wind answered. Connie continued, her voice lower now. Every 100 years, when hell aligns with our world, Gor-Mock has a chance to come through. If the 3 gates are opened, hell walks the earth. A fire has to be lit where the statue stands. Then, the violent ritual toward the innocent, typically a youth and an infant, is needed for a vessel. And lastly, the statue must feed on a living sacrifice. With each door opening, a little more of their world bleeds into ours. The first documentation of its summoning dates back to the late 1800s. The owner of this hotel, Mary Martin, was a conduit, a vessel. After her husband's mysterious death, she changed. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. Her workers heard the baby crying, her laughter echoing through the halls, and they would smell things burning. Her brother Jonathan came to help, but a week later, he was dead. Connie's voice seemed to echo into another time. In 1877, Mary Martin sat on her bed, her infant daughter Myrtle cradled in her arms. Her eyes were hollow, her skin ashen, and her breath came in short, erratic bursts. Every so often, her head jerked violently to the side before she erupted into manic laughter that echoed through the halls like shattered glass. Mary then began disappearing for days at a time. The servants whispered of what they'd heard behind locked doors, guttural crying, hysterical laughter, and the unmistakable stench of rot seeping through the floorboards. The once elegant hotel had begun to decay from the inside out. When her brother Jonathan arrived, he came in a horse-drawn buggy, the wheels crunching over frost-bitten gravel. His arrival was a spectacle. Servants rushed to unload his trunks, carrying polished leather cases and brass-bound crates into the lobby. He was wealthy, respectable, and determined to restore order. But the moment he stepped inside, the air thickened. The chandelier above him swayed, though there was no breeze. Within a week, Jonathan was bound to a chair in the chamber, his eyes wide with disbelief. The statue of Gor-Mock glowed with unnatural flame, and it exhaled with a sound like an angry bull. "Have you gone mad?" "It's me, your brother," he pleaded, voice cracking. Mary's twitching worsened. Her eyes rolled back as she lifted an ancient iron device, the pear of anguish. Without hesitation, she rammed it into his mouth. He screamed as she twisted the crank, and the sides of his mouth tore before succumbing to his injuries. Terrified, her servants wrote a desperate letter to the church, begging for intervention. When the priests arrived, they found the hotel silent. The servants were all dead, and Mary hung from a chain that was wrapped around her neck behind the front desk, near her own portrait. Her baby was smothered in her crib right at her feet. The painting's eyes followed them, glinting with something alive. Her spirit seeped into the canvas, her essence bound to oil and pigment. Guests who stayed in her room reported hearing lullabies sung in a rasping voice. Some reported being violently attacked, while others saw a pale woman drifting through the corridors, her feet never touching the ground, as the sound of chains was heard dragging behind her. It said she remained to protect what was hers, to find her child, and to release Gor-Mock. Even from beyond, she knew Myrtle had survived. Somewhere, somehow, the bloodline continued, and has been betrayed by choosing sanctity over her bloodline's blasphemy. By now, the storm was worsening. Snow buried Connie and the officers' tracks faster than they could shovel. Connie's voice cut through the wind. Mary's daughter survived. The church said it was a miracle. The church took her in, and she's been hidden ever since. Her whereabouts are only known to the Vatican. There was a little girl who had mysteriously died in a drowning accident many years later, and from then on, Mary's room was sealed to the public. Officer Mackenzie scoffed. "Sounds like a campfire story to me. If the doors are open, you'll be thinking differently. Tell you what, I'll tell you the origin story in detail one day, but for now, let's just get Father Mutombo and get out of here." She gave him a worried smile. The snowmobile roared beneath Fred as he neared the church. His wife, Nancy, lingered outside in her housecoat before disappearing through the doorway. He stopped at the entrance, unsettled as the storm shrieked around him, but the threshold was strangely clear. No snow piled against it or near it. A chill of unease pressed in, yet he swung off the machine and entered. Inside, the survivors sat motionless with their heads down in the pews, all facing the altar. The massive cross displayed at the front now hung upside down. From the front of the room, Nancy's soft, low voice could be heard singing gently. Spotting his wife seated there, he walked toward her, his chest tightening with emotion. "Nancy," he whispered. Her soft voice echoed back through the cathedral. "Did you find my boy?" Just feet away, he could see that her head was bowed. "Honey, are you okay? You had me worried. I've been looking for you all night. How did you get here?" Her head lifted slowly, and she turned to face him. "Did you find my boy?" Her eyes were gone, her skin gray and peeling. Fred stumbled backward, falling onto the floor. An old woman's hand shot out from the pew beside him, skeletal fingers gripping his arm. "Are you here to save us?" she croaked. "Because I think you may be too late." Her laughter twisted, morphing into a disembodied sound, neither male nor female, echoing from everywhere at once. The others rose from their pews, faces hollow, eyes blank. Fred bolted, running for the doors. Outside, he fell into the snow, clawing his way to his sled as the unholy laughter carried through the storm. After several frantic tries, the engine caught. The snowmobile sped into the blizzard. Moments later, a search and rescue team returning with survivors parked their vehicles and hurried inside to get warm. As the doors slammed shut behind them, growls erupted, quickly followed by screams of horror. Fred pressed forward through the whiteout. What seemed like a distant hilltop ahead slowly took form. It was rooftops, half buried beneath the drifts. Then, without warning, his snowmobile jolted to a stop. The impact threw him headlong into the storm. He tumbled wildly, cartwheeled through the air before crashing into a snowbank. A cloud of white swallowed him whole. For a long moment, nothing stirred until the soft crunch of footsteps broke the silence. Out of the swirling snow came the gatherer in heavy sealskin, his face hidden by goggles and a hood. With thick, gloved hands, he reached into the snow, grasped Fred's limp body and hauled him free. Without a word, he laid him on a sled and disappeared once more into the storm. At the rear of the Post and Pony Inn, Connie and Officer Mackenzie had hacked their way through the drift to find the storm cellar entrance. The officer eyed her curiously as she opened the doors. "So how do you know all this?" "My father taught me, and the visions showed me," she explained, still feeling along the wall. "He was a priest for many years. Our ancestry goes back centuries in the church. We're part of a bloodline that's been searching for this evil." She continued to explain as they walked through the tunnel and towards the sacrificial chamber. "I joined the church right after high school to study exorcisms, but I began to have unconventional feelings for my women peers. The church frowned on it, but my father always said I was chosen to fight in this war. The marking of a white dove birthmark." They stepped through the doorway to find the Harbo boy crucified against the far wall. From the shadows, the massive statue of Gor-Mock glowed, the flames in its belly rising and falling like a heartbeat. "My God," Officer Mackenzie whispered. Connie stared at the horror before her. "The gates opened. Someone's evoked the evil." Her gaze fell to the statue, her voice distant and reverent. "For centuries, the church searched for this thing. The followers kept moving it, hiding it. I can't believe it's been here in our town all along." "This is now a murder investigation," Officer Mackenzie said grimly. "Don't touch anything." "We need to leave," Connie replied. "We don't know how much power or influence the statue now possess." She left the room, and the officer followed. After Fred's accident, he awoke to the flicker of candlelight and a deep, throbbing ache in every bone. He was sprawled on a torn, faded couch. Across the room, the gatherer sat in a rocking chair, his face lost in shadow. "Easy, friend," he said. "You're in safe hands. You had an accident, and you are lucky to be alive. Looks like someone's watching over you." Fred tried to sit up. The man rose, poured a steaming cup of herbal medicine from a battered pot, and handed it to him. "Drink this," he said. "It'll help with the pain. Doesn't smell or taste great, but it works." "What's your name?" "Fred Harbo." Fred sniffed the drink and winced before taking a sip. "And you are?" The man smiled faintly. "You can call me the Gatherer." Fred coughed on the bitter liquid. "Something's not right in my head. What I saw at the church had to be my imagination." The Gatherer shook his head. "What you saw is what the ancestors spoke of. It's the end times. Blinding white sand falling from the sky as hell opens its doors, burying the town under mountains. The devils will infest the earth." "I need to find my son," Fred said, forcing himself upright. "You're in no condition to be moving." The man said gently. Fred's eyes hardened. He never made it home from school. He pushed to his feet, swaying. "What did you do to me?" "You need rest." He grabbed hold of Fred, who had lost his footing. Before Fred could reply, the world spun. He collapsed back onto the couch and fell unconscious. Connie and Officer Mackenzie stepped out from the secret tunnel and into the utility room hidden within the inn's wall. "The Vatican's going to love that the statue is finally found," Connie expressed, "especially after we got lucky 100 years ago. Mary's act of killing her daughter didn't open the gate because the baby survived. It was a miracle." "I don't believe in ghosts and goblins," Officer Mackenzie said, brushing a cobweb off his jacket. "It's all horse shit." "You should, officer," Connie gave a thin smile. "Some things in this world we'll never understand, Officer Mackenzie, like miracles, or the things that walk between our world and others." "Jesus Christ," he said. "Yes, him too. she replied jokingly. They had reached the lobby and froze at the sight of the O'Connor family huddled around Shelley on the couch, the young woman clutching her belly in pain. Connie's gaze shot to the fireplace, where the flames danced high. "This isn't good," she whispered. "We need to get the fuck out of here." "Who are these people?" Officer Mackenzie asked. "And where is Father Mutombo?" Connie didn't answer. She stood frozen, staring in disbelief at the flames dancing inside the fireplace. Peggy noticed the pair and rushed toward them. "Thank the Lord you're here. My daughter-in-law is in labor." Officer Mackenzie and Connie hurried over. "We're here to help," she said. "How far apart are her contractions?" "I don't know. It just started before you came," Peggy replied. "How many months along?" 8.5, Attila answered. "How long have you been here?" Connie asked. "Since yesterday evening," Peggy replied. "And we ate some food from the kitchen. We'll pay for it," she added. Richard looked at her and shook his head. As Shelley's contractions eased, Richard eyed them warily. "How'd you even know we were here?" "We didn't call anyone." Connie's eyes flicked toward the stairwell. "Where's Father Mutombo?" "Who?" Richard frowned. "There's no priest here. It's just us. How did you get in? The entrances are barricaded." "Forget Nigel," Officer Mackenzie said under his breath. "We need to get her to a hospital." "I think I can walk," Shelley said weakly, but Richard stepped between them. "You're not listening. The storm hasn't let up, and we're safe here. Food, water, shelter. We can have the baby here." "No," Connie snapped. "We're not safe. It's time to go. She needs a hospital," she urged, and they headed for the basement. She turned to the officer. "Once we get them out of here, I'll come back and look for Father Mutombo." At the mouth of the secret passage, Officer Mackenzie remembered what was down there and paused. "Why are you stopping?" Connie asked. Attila leaned toward his father. "Told you I felt a draft." Richard glared but said nothing. "There's a crime scene below," Officer Mackenzie stated. "Before we go in, I want everyone to close their eyes. We'll guide you through. You don't need to see this." Peggy smiled. "This must be part of the hotel's haunted tour." "I don't think so," Attila replied. They joined hands, eyes shut, and followed the officer through the narrow, sloping corridor. Torches burned in the iron sconces, their flames bending as the air grew heavy. From the darkness ahead came the rhythmic, guttural sound of Gor-Mock's statue. Richard grew curious about the sound and uncovered his eyes, peering around the room. "Bloody hell!" he shouted. "That's the missing boy! We had no part in this!" His arms shot up. At the sound of Richard's voice, the rest of the family instinctively uncovered their eyes. Panic erupted as they looked at the crucified boy. Peggy, however, remained unfazed, convinced it was part of the hotel's elaborate attractions. Shelley turned to her husband for comfort, but before he could react, Attila's stomach heaved violently, and vomit splashed down the front of her. "The boy looks so real, but the prop is a little much, don't you think?" Peggy said casually. "I feel like I'm at one of those murder mystery dinners." She looked at Richard for confirmation, but he could only stare dumbfounded. Officer Mackenzie stepped forward. "Let's just get you folks out of here. Then we can talk." Connie had disappeared and called out from the tunnel. There was urgency in her voice as it echoed. "Can I get some help here?" she yelled, and the group hastened towards her voice. With all their might, the group pressed on the doors, but they wouldn't budge. Outside, the storm had finally calmed. Snow once again buried the storm cellar entrance entirely, giving the illusion that no one had ever cleared it. The air around the Post and Pony Inn was thick with an uncanny tension, as though the night itself held its breath in worry about what was about to come. "Is everything okay?" Peggy asked, as Shelley clutched her stomach, her face becoming pale. "The babies are kicking," Shelley admitted, her voice strained. "It's like they want out of me. I can't be in here any longer." Officer Mackenzie growled. "We need a new plan. Let's get everyone back upstairs. We don't need to be in this area anymore." Back in the lobby, Shelley's contractions surged with alarming force. She cried out just as a sharp crack split the air. The large window shattered, shards scattering as a snowdrift burst through, cascading into the room like a white tide. The cold bit instantly. Attila lunged toward the breach as he spotted a shovel by the front desk, and with desperate energy, he began to clear the snow. Overhead, Mary Martin's portrait loomed, her painted eyes fixed and eerily aware of the chaos unfolding around her. Later, exhausted and half-buried in the drift, Attila tunneled his way through the pile, each movement slower than the last, driven only by the fading hope of not being able to escape. Richard approached his son. "You need a break. Let me help," Richard offered. "I'm okay," Attila panted between the shovelfuls of snow. "This is a way out. I'm not having my babies in a haunted hotel," he stated. "Go sit with your family," Officer Mackenzie advised, taking the shovel from him. Mary's eyes followed the officer as he threw the first load of snow. Then, without warning, the tunnel collapsed on itself, burying him alive. The group rushed to dig him out, but when they finally freed him, it was too late. Officer Mackenzie was dead. Not only was he suffocated by the snow, but his neck was also broken. "He's gone," Richard said grimly, pointing to the bulge and twist in his neck, and then to the mouth full of snow. Shelley's contractions began to ease. "I'll be back," Connie said, moving away. "Are you going to get the workers?" Peggy asked. She was still by Shelley's side. "Peggy," Richard barked, "and where are you going?" "I'm going to try to find Father Motumbo," Connie replied, as she descended the stairs to the guest rooms. "There's no priest here, lady," Richard then yelled as she vanished into the dark. At the bottom of the stairs, Connie paused, peering into the darkness of the hall. From within, the faint rattle of chains stirred, as if it were beckoning. One by one, the hallway lights flickered to life, all except the one outside Mary Martin's suite. Connie stepped forward, each footfall measured. Approaching the door, the latch clicked, and the door opened, inviting her in. She eased the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ash. Scorched pages from a Bible lay scattered across the floor, and the blackened outline marked where the priest had been dragged through. She closed the door and left the area in a hurry. The lights turned off simultaneously, leaving her to retreat within the darkness. In the hotel bar, Richard and Attila carefully laid Officer Mackenzie's body on the floor. Richard moved behind the bar, pouring a drink. "Fancy a drink?" he offered. "I'm okay," Attila replied. "I'm going to take Shelley to the room to rest." "Suit yourself," Richard said. "Bring your mother with you." Connie entered carrying a large pot of snow and a bedsheet. She looked spooked. Richard noticed her expression. "What happened to you?" She covered the officer with the sheet and poured the snow over him, ignoring his question. "If we can't find a way out, I don't want to smell a rotting corpse." Richard lifted his glass. "How about you?" She looked at him confused. "Drink?" he said as he held out a glass of whiskey. "I haven't had a drink in 10 years, but what the hell, we're screwed anyway." Connie took the glass and drank it in one gulp before pouring herself another. Richard and Connie sat at the bar. Richard swirled the liquor in his hand as he spoke. "Down there? Is that some kind of cult activity?" "Something like that," Connie replied. "Did you find your priest?" he then asked. Connie nodded. "Yes." "And?" he asked. She gave him a look. Richard's eyes darkened. "Death hasn't sat well with me since the war. I was a tanker. A German threw a grenade into our cannon. I watched my best friend get blown to pieces. I was lucky to survive. Now I avoid death whenever I can. Hospitals, funerals, everything." "Sorry to hear that." "Me too. Shit, I haven't spoken about this in years," he replied, downing the rest of his drink and pouring another. He paused. "Never met one of you lesbian fellas before." Connie stood, offended. "You really know how to offend someone, Mick." She put down her drink and left the empty glass on the bar. "It's Dick, not Mick," he corrected, realizing too late that she was mocking him. He chuckled, tipping his glass in acknowledgement. At the gatherer's shelter, Fred awoke alone, groggy and disoriented. The sound of voices drifted from elsewhere in the building. He struggled to his feet, leaning against the wall. In the abandoned warehouse, adults of various races conversed amongst themselves in a large room. Torn couches littered the floor, and salt lined the perimeter. Indian trinkets and relics hung from the walls and ceiling. Jackets and winter gear hung near the door. In the corner, the gatherer meditated. A woman's voice called softly, "Let me help you." She grasped Fred's arm, guiding him into a chair. "I need to find my son," Fred said. "You can't go out there," she replied. "He found you, like he found all of us. That means you have the marking." "The marking?" "The dove-shaped birthmark," she said, lifting her shirt to reveal it just under her bra strap. "We all have it, everyone in this room." Fred excused himself to the washroom. In the mirror, he exposed the dove birthmark on his buttock, then returned to the gathering space, pulling on his snow gear. The gatherer approached him. "If we can't make you stay, then join me. We can look for your son on the way." He addressed the others. "The Great Spirit has shown me another. She's stranded in a hotel. The evil is here, and we must prepare." Down at the shipping dock, the men put on snowshoes. They were armed and ready. 2 tall, muscular Native American men stood guard at the door, spears tipped with glass and holy water. The entrance is lined with salt for protection. Outside, snowmobiles lined the area. The gatherer led Fred down the ramp of snow, glancing back at the vehicles. "Change your mind?" the gatherer asked. "Why don't we take the sleds?" Fred asked. "I can't recognize the signs if I'm on a machine," the gatherer explained. "We must hurry." Back in the bar, Richard dozed off with a half-empty glass in hand. The snow-covered corpse of Officer Mackenzie seemed to shift before him. Startled awake, Richard scrambled forward, thinking the man was alive. He pushed the snow away, but the corpse remained, twisted and lifeless. "What in the bloody hell?" he said to himself. Richard jolted awake, his body slamming to the floor on top of what he first thought was Officer Mackenzie. Only then did he realize it wasn't the officer at all. It was Alex O'Reilly, his best friend from the war. Alex's uniform was tattered, scorched, and stitched together in every direction, his face a patchwork of scars and stitches. He stared at Richard with hollow eyes, silent for a long moment before speaking in a thick Irish brogue. "Hey, brother? What the fuck are you doing here, mate?" Richard choked out as he scrambled to his feet. "You're dead." Alex's eyes roamed his own ruined uniform. "I guess I am." He rose from beneath the sheet and lumbered toward Richard. "Fancy a drink? Like the old days," Richard said, trying to mask his fear with bravado. "No," Alex replied, "but I'll fancy your soul." In an instant, Alex lunged. Richard fell hard to the floor, the weight of his friend crushing him. And then the nightmare ended. Richard awoke fully this time, sliding off the corpse of Officer Mackenzie, his heart hammering. Squeamish, he scrambled to his feet and fled the bar, pausing at the doorway to glance back at the body. As he staggered down the stairs and toward his room, the darkness in Mary Martin's sweet hallway seemed to shift. The lights flickered on and off rapidly. Peggy stood at the far end, staring blankly at Mary Martin's door, unmoving, trance-like. "Peggy, hun? What in bloody hell are you doing?" he called, approaching her. She didn't respond. Richard's unease grew as she took deliberate steps forward and entered the room. He followed, still calling to her, but the door clicked shut behind her. He moved down the hallway, each step echoing in the silence. Just as his fingers brushed the doorknob, it flew open with a violent jolt. An unseen force yanked him inside, and the door slammed shut. At that exact moment, every light in the corridor blinked out, plunging the hall back into total darkness. In the kitchen, Connie clutched a spool of rope, scanning for an escape. In the shadowed corner, an escape hatch drew her eye. She threw the rope over her shoulder and began to climb, pushing open a hatch at the top with ease. The rooftop was barren, and the snow was soft beneath her boots. No landmarks were visible, just an endless expanse of white. Connie approached the edge, looking down past the brick partition. The snow was too fluffy to jump into, but if she tied a rope, they could descend at least part way. She hoped the short fall into the snow would break their fall. From behind, footsteps approached, and Connie turned to see Richard. He didn't look like himself. His eyes were vacant. His movements were slow and trance-like. "You scared the shit out of me," she said. "Are you drunk or having a stroke?" He didn't respond. He walked toward her, blank and unfeeling. Connie instinctively stepped back, closer to the roof's edge. A burning sensation flared in her arm as her birthmark began to fade. "What's your problem, asshole?" she snapped. "You can offend someone, but you can't take it. Is that it?" Before she could react further, Richard shoved her. She stumbled and fell, disappearing into the snowdrift below. The roof remained pristine with no footprints, and there was no Richard. Far from the hotel, the Gatherer and Fred trudged through the snow. Snowmobiles roared distantly, but the silence of the winter landscape was deafening. "Are you some kind of shaman or oracle?" Fred asked. "I was born with a gift," the Gatherer replied. "The Great Spirit guides me. My mentor, the tribe's shaman, trained me all my life for what is about to happen. The evil that comes will spread darkness, killing all living creatures like a plague. We must hurry. The stronger it gets, the more the hell fiends will spill into our world." Back at the Post and Pony Inn, Peggy, Attila, and Shelley have fallen asleep. A low whisper of a woman's voice begins to call Shelley's name. Shelley rose, trance-like, and left the room. Attila awoke to find her gone. The sound of chains dragging faded down the hall. He gently shook his mother awake. "Shelley's gone, and Dad's not back yet." Peggy got up from her position and let out a sigh. "Let's go get them. He's probably drunk." Shelley crossed the lobby and entered the utility room. There she found a utility knife and retrieved it before she descended the stairs into the sacrificial chamber. She undressed and sat before the statue with the knife in hand as the flames roared within the statue's belly. Upstairs, Peggy and Attila hadn't found Richard. Hearing sounds from the utility room, they approached. Inside the chamber, they could hear Shelley laughing hysterically, so they entered. They froze at the sight of Shelley sitting naked on the floor in front of the statue with the knife in her hand. "Shelley, are you okay?" Attila said as he kept his distance. Peggy had become hypnotized by Gor-Mock's rhythmic breathing. Her eyes glazed over as the sound lulled her into a trance. Shelley twisted unnaturally and lunged at him with feral intensity, only to vanish inches before impact. In the flickering shadows, she remained seated, unmoved, the knife now poised beneath her swollen belly. Silent and resolute, she whispered a chant, her gaze locked on the statue as she began the ritual. Without a scream, without hesitation, she pierced her own flesh, performing a crude cesarean section with chilling precision. Blood pooled around her, dark and glistening, yet tears streamed down her cheeks, proof that some fragile shard of humanity still flickered within the darkness that consumed her. The newborn girl wailed, her cry strangely hypnotic, weaving through the chamber like a spell. Attila's mind fractured under its pull, his eyes glazed over, his body swaying as if caught in a trance. Wordless and hollow, he drifted toward the gaping belly of Gor-Mock. Grasping the handle, his flesh hissed and melted on contact, yet he uttered no sound. With eerie calm, he climbed into the statue feet first, surrendering himself to the flames that roared to life within. A single piercing scream tore through the chamber, and then silence. Outside the scorched threshold, the upper half of Attila's body slumped, smoldering, a grim monument to the ritual's cost. The infant's cries warped into snarls and growls as a demonic dog took form. The demon dog was a monstrous hybrid, a four-legged abomination with the features of a newborn fetus twisted into the body of an undeveloped dog. Its hairless skin glistened under the faint light, and after its transformation, it had grown to the size of a tiger. The transformation was grotesquely asymmetrical. Limbs stretched at random, muscles forming unevenly beneath the taut skin. Hands ballooned into claws, nails sharp and jagged. The skull elongated, the jaw cracking before unhinging entirely, rows of teeth erupting from the gums. Its nose stretched into a snout, while indentations for ram-like horns began carving themselves into the skull. A high-pitched and ear-splitting screech tore from the creature as it dragged Shelley into the dark tunnel, heading straight for the storm cellar doors. It skidded to a halt, bit clean through the umbilical cord, then lunged upward. The doors burst open in a blinding wave of white, snow swirling violently. With a final roar, the creature vanished into the forest. Behind it, the doors slammed shut, snow piling on top of them until they vanished beneath its weight. Still in a trance, Peggy approached Shelley's lifeless body. Her hands, slick with blood and slime, as she reached into the womb and drew out the second baby, but it was stillborn. She took the utility knife, severed the umbilical cord, and cleared the residue from its throat. Then, with a firm slap to its back, the newborn let out a cry. Peggy cradled the infant gently before walking away. In the bathroom of Mary Martin's suite, Peggy hummed a lullaby as she cleaned the newborn in the tub. She turned the child over and noticed a small, pointed tail. Its eyes flickered, serpentine for a moment, before blinking into human form. The reincarnation of Gor-Mock had come into the world. Peggy rocked the baby, her humming steady. "It's okay, someone will be here shortly," she stated. As night fell, the Gatherer and Fred continued to trudge through the record-deep snow outside. The storm cellar entrance lay ahead, partially exposed. Flashlights revealed the demon dog's tracks leading into the forest, a faint streak of blood from the umbilical cord marking its path before disappearing among the trees. They exchanged a glance before prying open the storm cellar doors and descending into the darkness. Entering the sacrificial chamber, horror greeted him. Richard and Officer Mackenzie hung, entangled in vines that protruded from the ceiling. Shelley, Connie, and Father Mutombo were now crucified upside down against the walls alongside the Harbo boy. Outside the statue's gaping belly, Attila's charred remains lay slumped. "Douglas! Oh my God, what did they do to you? Who would do this?" Fred cried, rushing to his son's mutilated body nailed to the upside-down cross. Without hesitation, he grabbed Douglas by the torso and yanked hard. The nails tore through flesh with a sickening crunch, peeling skin from bone. Fred cradled him tightly, whispering through tears as the chamber echoed with the sound of Gor-Mock. The Gatherer approached, calm but urgent. "I'm truly sorry, but we must leave. It isn't safe here." Fred shoved him away. "I'm not leaving my boy." The Gatherer gripped him firmly. "We'll return once it's over. If we stay, this evil will claim us too. We must stop this." Reluctantly, Fred allowed himself to be dragged out, his eyes never leaving his son. Outside, the Gatherer spotted one of the buried snowmobile's skis exposed. They cleaned the machine, then mounted and fled, retreating to his shelter. At the Gatherer's shelter, the winter trinkets and protective wards were gone. Only piles of ash remained where the gathered people had stood. "Where is everyone?" Fred asked, panic rising. "I can't help but think this evil used me to gather them so it could take them," the Gatherer replied, tasting the ash on his tongue. His pupils dilated, and visions overtook him. In the vision, the Gatherer watched from the shadows as the men guarding the loading dock began to hear strange knocks from the door that the Gatherer and Fred had just exited. One man turned back, thinking it could be the men returning. He opened it to find a black figure coalescing from the air. As the man stepped closer, a gust of wind came through the opening, blowing the salt that was protecting them, and both men were engulfed in blue flames, their bodies reduced to ash in seconds. The entity drifted toward the others gathered on the upper level. Screams tore through the space as it passed among them, harvesting their souls with merciless precision. It's only you and me now. We must track this thing before it grows too powerful. These hell fiends can manipulate us, which feeds the evil within that hotel. Special weapons were gathered, melee blades, rifles with their bullets, and arrows all prepared with tips of glass, infused with an ancient remedy handed down by the ancestors. It carried the sanctity of holy water. "You think these'll do the trick?" Fred asked, looking at the odd weaponry. "They're our only chance," the gatherer said, strapping glass-tipped tomahawks to his waist. "Can you use a rifle?" Fred nodded, and a rifle with a scope and a handful of glass-tipped bullets with holy water inside was passed to him. Fred sat on the back of a snowmobile, watching the sun rise, as the gatherer examined the demon dog's tracks. Blood was licked from his fingers to divine a vision. This hell fiend is headed for a school, feeding on children to summon its master. We must save the children first, then the rest can be stopped. Through the dense forest, where snow-laden branches sagged under the blizzard's weight, they watched as the demon dog leapt from tree to tree. It vanished beneath the drifts, only to erupt from the snow moments later in erratic bursts. Fred fired, but his shots went wide, splintering bark and echoing through the woods. The demon dog vanished into the wilderness, swallowed by the snow-laced trees. Fred spun, frantic, eyes scanning. Then an eruption. A burst of powder exploded from the drooping branches as the demon dog lunged, a blur of muscle and claws. It slammed into them, knocking both men off the sled and into the soft, unforgiving snow. The gatherer rolled, then scrambled upright, boots sinking deep. He tore the bow from his shoulder, nocked an arrow, and steadied his breath. The demon dog was on Fred, thrashing wildly, claws raking, jaws snapping. Fred screamed, blood streaking the snow as he fought to fend it off. The gatherer found a clear line of sight and fired. The first arrow struck, though the vial of holy water didn't break upon contact, and the beast barely flinched. It turned, snarled, and kept attacking. A second arrow hit, this time in the neck, the vial not breaking again. The demon dog, unfazed, continued its rage. The gatherer took a calculated risk. Swinging his tomahawks, tipped with the ancient remedy, he struck the demon dog directly where the arrowheads were located. The glass smashed and the liquid splashed, igniting its flesh in a blue flame. The demon dog screeched, convulsed, and began to shrivel. The gatherer rushed to Fred, who was mangled, his snowsuit torn to reveal raw flesh and bone. "Leave me!" Fred gasped through pain and blood. "You have to finish this." "I can't just leave you," the gatherer insisted. His voice went low and tense. "It may be too late. The power is too strong. The Great Spirit hasn't shown me anything else." Fred raised his bloodied hand. "Maybe you can see through me," he whispered. He touched the gatherer's hand, smearing blood across it. The gatherer closed his eyes, tasting it, and a vision overwhelmed him. "I can stop this," he said. "The hotel. There's a bag with a book inside. It contains the directions to defeat it. There's still a chance." Fred's body slumped, lifeless, his injuries finally claiming him. "You go now to the Great Spirit," the gatherer said, voice breaking. He covered Fred in a shallow grave of snow, then chanted softly, honoring the fallen man. Inside the chamber, the air was thick with silence. Peggy, still in a hypnotic trance, now stood before the statue, cradling the newborn. Father Mutombo's bag hung over her shoulder. What remained of Attila's charred corpse continued to dangle from the statue's belly. his limbs twisted and blackened. The breathing had stopped. The ritual was complete. And Gor-Mock, ancient and ravenous, had found its new vessel nestled within the infant. A rifle cocked behind Peggy, but she didn't flinch. She stood motionless, as if the sound hadn't registered. "I'll take the baby, and that bag over your shoulder," the gatherer called, his voice steady. "They aren't yours to keep," Peggy replied, her tone neutral and demonic. The gatherer mounted the rifle, holding it at close range. "And they aren't yours, hell fiend. I'm not asking. You will hand them to me right now." Suddenly, an axe slammed into his head. The rifle discharged, the bullet ricocheting off the stone. Blow after blow rained down, each strike tearing at his body until it almost detached from itself. "That's a little overkill, don't you think?" the old man's voice called. The hotel owners had entered unnoticed behind the gatherer and attacked him. The male carried a man slung over his shoulder, his head concealed under a burlap sack. His wife, bloodied, held the axe, shrugging at her husband's comment as she stared at the mangled body of the gatherer. Behind them, Gor-Mock's cloaked followers stood silently near the tunnel's entrance. Exhaling sharply, he surveyed the chaos his wife had unleashed. "There's going to be a lot to clean up," he stated, irritation simmering beneath his breath. He turned to retrieve the supplies, already resigned to the state of the mess. With a grunt, he let the corpse slide from his shoulder, the thud echoing through the chamber. Then, without another word, he vanished into the tunnel, the followers silently parting to let him pass. The woman tossed the axe blade into the head of the man under the burlap sack and turned to Peggy. "I'll gladly take him and that bag from you," she said, smiling as blood pooled by her feet. Peggy obeyed, handing over the newborn and letting the bag drop to the floor. She then walked to the statue's belly and pulled out Attila, who was now only a torso. It flopped to the floor, and she stepped inside. A scream wailed as the flames consumed her. The woman cradled the baby, watching as Peggy burned alive within the statue. Screams filled the chamber, but she remained composed, rocking the child. "The casualties from this event will be blamed on the storm," the woman declared to her followers. "And this, what we've accomplished, will elevate our status in the afterlife." With that, she departed. Her followers dropped to one knee as the infant passed before them. Later, in a secluded convent hidden from the world, Mother Abbess Myrtle Martin, just over a century old but still razor-sharp, sat at her desk, studying a worn notebook. The names of those bearing the dove-shaped birthmark who had perished were crossed out in thick strokes. Many names remained, most of them distinctly indigenous. With a quiet sigh, she set the notebook on top of an old photograph of her mother, Mary Martin, her father, and herself, nestled tenderly in her mother's arms. The image seemed to breathe, holding her in its embrace, until a sudden knock at the door splintered the silence and pulled her back to the present. "My apologies, Mother Abbess," a sister said, stepping in. "There's an urgent call from the Vatican." "It's begun," Myrtle said, her voice steady. "What's begun?" "The end of times," she replied, glancing toward a map on the wall. Several Native American territories were circled in red ink. "We must retrieve the last line of defense." The sister hesitated. "Do you think they'll help the church? After everything, the forced displacement and the betrayal?" Myrtle's gaze didn't waver. "We have to try," she said, though her voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. "I hope we can be forgiven. They are our only hope. That's a story we'll have to tell at another time." She rises from her seat and carefully packs a Bible, her notebook, a small vial of anointing oil, a rosary, and a few other sacred relics. Despite her age, she walked with quiet grace to the map. Gently, she removed the pins, folds it with practiced precision, and tucks it under her arm. With everything gathered, she leaves the room, and the sister followed behind her. The end.